Welcome to Empower Ed, a PIQE podcast where we talk about the issues that matter most to families, schools, and communities. I'm Iliana Gallego, and together we're unlocking the power of education. Today is a special episode because we're excited to introduce the person who will help lead PIQE into its next chapter. Joining us is our new CEO and president, Reyna Hernandez. Throughout her career, Reyna has been guided by a deep belief in the power of families, communities, and education to create opportunity. She's worked alongside parents, educators, and leaders to strengthen family engagement and advance educational equity. Today, we will get to know the person behind the title. We'll talk about what inspires Reina, the experiences that have shaped her leadership, what drew her to PIQE, and her vision for the future of our organization and the families we serve. So, who better to tell this story than Reina herself? Reina, welcome to the podcast. We're very happy that you're here with us.
Thank you so much. It's a true pleasure to be not only at the podcast, but at PIQE.
Thank you, Reina. So, let's get started where every good story begins. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and the community you grew up in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a small town outside of Chicago. My grandfather had actually immigrated when in around the 1950s, first to Chicago, and then he moved to this town called Waukegan, which is where I was born and raised. It was a very diverse town that had a growing community when I was growing up of Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, people from a variety of other countries that just sort of grew over time. And we went from when my mom was a little girl, there weren't any Mexican grocery stores in Waukegan. So every weekend they would drive down to Chicago, buy a case of tortillas, buy chiles secos, and like bring them back home and then kind of carry out the week. By the time I was growing up, every corner had, you could pick up coca mexicana or, there were carnicerias that had a lot of the cuts of meat, the cortes that we eat and things like that. So it was really, truly, I felt very embraced. That said, a lot of times in school, I was one of the only Latinas because I grew up in a diverse town, but as we know, sometimes education is a little bit stratified. And so I started off in bilingual education and then got exited and went into a kindergarten program. My mom was told about a gifted program, a magnet school that the school district had, and she tried to get me in the program. They said it was too late. She insisted, she advocated for me, they tested me, and I was admitted into the gifted school, the magnet school. But there were very few Latinos there. Usually every grade might have had one or two students that came from a Latino background. I was usually the only person that spoke Spanish. So even growing up in that community, a lot of times we went to church in Spanish. We at home, I lived sometimes with my grandparents and they spoke Spanish, but everything in school was very much in English for me.
Okay. So you mentioned that your mom advocated for you. I remember you telling us this story when you first came to PIQE. How do you think her involvement in your education shaped your future in particular? It's something like what we do with our families, but I would like to know like your perspective.
Yeah, no, it's, and I see so much of PIQE and the families and kind of in my own story. My mom was a teenager when I was born, and she had gone through some challenging experiences already. She actually had to leave high school to be a caretaker for her mom because of medical issues. And her mom died very young as well when my mom was in her early 20s. So, my mom didn't have a lot of formal background and guidance. She had actually very poor guidance from guidance counselors at school. Things that we look back on now and think, if only we had known then, if only the family understood what options she had. But they basically kind of encouraged her to drop out because they didn't feel that education was going to be that important for her future anyway. And I just think about all of that now. But for us, for her kids, my mom, she often says, I don't know how I know, because I tell her, Mom, how did you know to advocate in these ways? How did you know to ask when an authority tells you, no, it's too late for your child to be tested for that school? How do you come back and say, no, I insist, like this is something that she deserves and that she needs, and I know that she's going to pass that test. And she says, I have just always had so much faith, and she says, I've felt guided. I think this is where our faith comes in, where she says, I've just felt guided to know what was best for my kids, and I will not take no for an answer when it comes to your future and your success. And I think of that a lot. I think a lot of times we're very good within these close-knit communities, um, advocating for others and supporting others. Sometimes we don't do as good a job doing it for ourselves. And so being able to think about not only how our families, we can support them to support their children, but also their own personal growth and their own personal development. And that's such an exciting part of PIQE. And I think of what it would have been like if my mom would have had that kind of guidance and support and encouragement for her own growth. She got there eventually. Eventually, when I was in high school, she was getting her associate's degree. When I was away at law school, she got her bachelor's degree. She got a teaching degree. But she just always was just a fierce advocate for others. So when I was little, the job that she had was as a bilingual liaison. And a lot of times that's one of the lowest paid jobs in a school. Sometimes that's a person who almost doesn't have a job description. They do whatever is needed to support families and, translating and helping provide information. But it's such a critical touch point. And she just kind of grew from there. So for me, both with my own kind of the way she guided me and my siblings and fought for us and read the information and asked all of the questions, but then seeing how she did that for other families, it's sort of that's the root of, I think, the family engagement work for me.
It's amazing because many times I can tell your mother is a very strong woman. And I think that strength many times we find it once we become mothers. So that's why maybe she didn't advocate, or many of our parents feel like they didn't advocate for themselves. But once you have your kids, it's like, I know I can get this. I know my child deserves this. And you find that strength. What we sometimes don't have is like a guide, especially when you're in a new country, right? So you don't know where. It's not that you don't want to do that for your child, but you need a guide. And I think that's where PIQE comes in. So that's amazing to work in this organization. Hearing your story, it's easy to understand why PIQE's mission is so personal or feels personal. But what was it about PIQE? Because I know you've been in different organizations that made you think this is where I want to make a difference.
Yeah, I've been collaborating with PIQE for many, many years. And I've been working in the family and community engagement space for, also over a decade, and working in the national space. Spent the last 8.5 years with a national association that was focused on family, school, and community engagement. So I've gotten to know a lot of organizations that are out there doing important work to support families, and I've done a lot of work to support many organizations. But the closer I got to PIQE, every time I would collaborate with the team, every time I would hear some of the stories, it felt so familiar and it felt so much like home. It's the how. And I think, if we had to put a fine point on it, it's the relational side of PIQE. We know that engaging families is relational work. It requires trust. It requires building connection. If people don't trust you, they're not necessarily going to listen to what you have to say, and they're not going to learn the information. They're not going to open up. in those spaces. And so much of our programming is dialogue, it's engagement, and that requires us building those relationships and building that trust. And the more I would hear about how PK operates, its connection from day one, its phone calls, its sharing of people's stories, whether it's a recruiter or the facilitator or the connection that they start to build at the school, it just, that part of the story was so powerful. And when the opportunity presented itself, it gave me an opportunity to learn more. And the deeper I got, the more I learned about how PK operates. It felt so values aligned. And it made me incredibly excited to be able to bring some of what I know and some of my skills and experiences here to kind of take us into our next 40 years.
Yes, I love that. And you know what? Right now that you're saying we're talking about advocating for your children, right? And many times we think only of like younger children because they don't know. But it's also, I have a daughter in college already, and it's also teaching them to advocate so for themselves. So PK, I think, empowers and gives parents the tools, like
Mhm.
literally, to tell your
Um,
child, no, you know what, you need to go and ask this, and then let them, even though they're already 18 or
mhm.
19, you need to, and like teach them how to advocate for themselves. So when
Absolutely.
we're talking about advocating in PK, I just want to make clear that it's not only for young children, it's for all of our
Mhm.
children, no matter their age.
Absolutely. You know, my first experiences engaging with families in kind of this sort of way, I was in high school still. I was collaborating with an organization that does youth leadership development. In my hometown, it was very new. I had participated the very first year that they were opening up in Chicago and in my town, and I wanted more kids to be able to participate. So I was a sophomore recruiting freshmen, then I was a junior recruiting freshmen and sophomores and helping train them. And my mom got involved because they had questions. And so she was helping the families navigate and fundraise and, understand how important this was. And we're talking about high school students, but the amount of engagement and the pathways that we created for families to be able to continue to be involved, to understand basic things, complicated things, understand how, the tracking works and the decisions you make freshman year will impact your opportunities senior year, right? And all of that. And I've always felt that engaging families, I know in my own story, my mom continues to engage with me. My dad passed away a few years back, but we would talk about work. We would talk about what I was doing, what I was struggling with. And even though they've never experienced most of what I experienced as an adult, their perspective, their guidance, their values, the ability to continue to anchor me in all of that has never stopped being valuable. So I think, how I think about the work that PK does, we have elementary programs, we have programs for middle school, programs for high school. The way you engage with your children and with their school changes, but the importance of having that support, having that foundation, that never, in my experience, stops being important and stops being valuable. But a lot of times it gets harder and it gets more complicated, which is when I think support is almost needed the most, because that is when, information, understanding FAFSA, understanding the university system, understanding A to G, understanding so many things that I think, I'm excited, and I think it's empowering to be a part of a system that is helping families get through all of that and get their kids through all of that. And just the pride that I see at graduations. My very first BK event was a graduation for one of the programs focused on high school students, and their parents had participated in 2 years of navigation and all of that. And the pride that they had in saying, my child is going to this university, to that university, and, earning a scholarship for them through that program was just so truly, it feels like a bit of a culmination of the work, but we know it continues, right? Retaining college students and all of that. So we really are creating, I think, a lifetime pathway for so many families.
Absolutely. And I think you said it right. It changes, the family engagement changes, but it's always there. It never, and it's really what creates a difference, right? So we always need to be present. So tell me a little bit about what excites you the most about joining the PIQE community.
Uh, I think so one of the things that is, I think, an exciting challenge is that right now, I've actually met PK out of the state of California, doing work in the state of Massachusetts, where PK had been a partner in the Massachusetts Statewide Family Engagement Center, a national federal initiative I was very involved in at the time. And I collaborated with a number of organizations in different states, but it was just such a powerful, strong connection to have in Massachusetts. And, now that I'm here, there is just the potential for being able to grow, bring some of the beautiful PK programming and kind of approach to other places throughout the country, I think is really exciting. I have now had a chance to visit all 7 of PK's California offices and met the teams and, just being around people who are experiencing a variety of different contexts, what the environment is like in the Central Valley versus LA versus San Diego or the Bay Area. Each community is addressing different issues, different contexts, but at the end of the day, there's so much commonality. So being able to think about how, as an organization, we can continue to grow and impact more families, both within the state of California and then nationally, I think is incredibly exciting.
So now that we're talking about those different situations and issues, what would you say are current issues that our parents and our educators are facing that you feel is important for us at PIQE to address going into this next academic school year, for example?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's impossible. We are in 2026, and it is impossible doing the kind of work we do, particularly in the state of California, to not, mention the impact that a lot of the immigration enforcement has had on our communities. And it's not just immigration enforcement. It's been environments of fear and a lot of media and intentional coverage and advertising and promotion of people not belonging. I remember being in a grocery store and hearing an advertisement, a PSA that was telling people that they didn't belong and that they should leave, or they would be found. And that just felt so wrong to me. And I'm in a grocery store with families getting groceries for their kids. I have been, personally, I started carrying a whistle and I, became part of a rapid response, kind of initiative within the community. And it has felt incredibly challenging in the communities I've been in. And from what I have heard, from staff and from families. So I think that is a very big challenge. And it's not just the immediacy of it. I think addressing the continued impact that I'm sure it will have, very much like when we as a community made our way through COVID. And it wasn't enough that the incidences went down. It still felt very unnerving to go into tight spaces or, walk into a restaurant with a lot of people and the tables really close together. It took us a while to recover emotionally from all of that as well. And I think part of the power of PIQE, while we are focusing on helping families, kind of navigate the educational system and be civically engaged and, support their child's education, this layer and this cloud has impacted all of that. and it's impacted kids. And so helping families, I think of our SEL program and helping families learn and understand more about how we develop social emotional capacities and how that might help themselves in addition to their kids and help with just coping and dealing, and understanding. So building community together, empowering our parent ambassadors. Just there's so many ways that I think PK can help and support and impact the community at a time when so many people, I think, have felt really squeezed and pushed by those circumstances. In addition to that, I think these are just challenging times for so many other, there have been threats to decrease funding that serves our communities around education, health, other program areas that really impact education and they impact our families. So, being a participant, being an active organization in supporting community efforts that support our families, like when the wildfires hit, that, PK was involved and PKLA was collaborating with other organizations to help families access food and clothing and basic things that they needed. So, so I think we are at the ready to handle some of the challenging things that are coming, but it's definitely a difficult time, I think, for anyone who's working with and supporting education and families right now.
That's right. It is a difficult time, but also we as PIQE try to not just share the workshops that empower them, but also cover the stories that might help them, right? So somebody's going through something similar to you. So we always encourage everyone to look at our website and our blogs and our news stories, because you might find something that might be helpful to you, as well as obviously the podcast.
Absolutely. And there's also a lot of inspiration in that. I mean, I have experienced community coming together more in times of crisis, is often the case, than in times of, when everything is okay. I think the pandemic brought people together in really amazing ways. And I think that right now, I've seen a lot of community unity and support of each other and ways that, families have said, we're going to continue celebrating, we'll continue to be supportive of each other. And I think that is the best way to make your way through difficult times. And we are a network and we have brought people together and we'll continue to do so, which I think is empowering.
Absolutely, yes. Reyna, I can't not ask you about being a leader, a woman leader. So I would like to see, what is it for you to serve as a woman leading an organization like PIQE? And how can other women find inspiration from you?
Yeah, I think it took many years for me to kind of unpack a lot of that because I think so much of my, I've always been a nerd. I was always really focused on doing well in school and doing the right things. And, I'm an oldest daughter, which I think also impacts a lot of that because there's a lot of responsibility. My youngest siblings were 5, 11, and 13 years younger than me. So when I was in high school, I was helping get kids to baseball practice or ballet practice or, going to and from school and all of that. And just carrying a lot of both responsibility within a family and then within an academic space that then became a professional space. And being someone that, whether I wanted to or not, in my community, I had been the first graduate to attend Harvard in like over 50 years, and came back and did some graduation speeches to high school students, and people were looking. It was sort of being in a spotlight where I think it wasn't until people started to show up and tell stories. I remember being out at a restaurant and someone comes up to me and says, Reyna, it's you, right? And I was trying to identify the person. I didn't really recognize her. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, you don't know me, but I know you. You helped to mentor my brothers for that college leadership program." And then she says, "You spoke at my high school once, and I remember this thing that you said." And she like quoted back something I had said in this one speech. And I think it really hit me then. My mom always would say, "You're an example for other people and for the community." But that just, I was like, how does this this woman who's never met me before remember something I said in a speech? She was no longer high school age, right? That speech had happened years before, but it stuck with her. And so it was a time when it sort of hit me. It's important to both be mindful of that. People are watching and paying attention, and the example is an important one because sometimes it's I might be the first person or the closest person that someone meets that's in a role that I've been in. When I was working in the state of Illinois, I was one of the highest ranking Latinas in state government in Illinois. I was an assistant superintendent at the Illinois State Board of Education. And being in that role, I realized, and had given a presentation to the state early childhood directors because I oversaw the state's early childhood system, the state's bilingual education system. And I started with pictures and with a story of a family that was, by so many factors, considered high risk in the context of early childhood. We had a lot of risk factors that we prioritized. I was like, this is a teenage mother. This is a family that has mixed status. This is multi-generational, overcrowded, many people living in a very small space, low income, non-high school graduate, just adding all these layers. And I said, and one of my concerns is that when we're working with these families that we've prioritized because of their current risk factors, that we are thinking about keeping them in school, trying to get them to graduate, keeping them, let's say, out of the disciplinary system, and that instead of preparing them to be our boss's boss, instead of preparing them to be the leaders of these programs, I said, so when you look at your families, your high-risk families, I hope that you see me, because this was my story. I am the person who started with all of those risk factors, but I was in a loving family, a family that advocated for me. I was in a space where I never knew that, the food I was eating was the food that we were able to piece together at the end of the month when the check runs low and it's taquitos de frijol. And I would look forward to them. And sometimes I would ask for them at the beginning of the month, and my mom would say, "No, we have meat." And I was like, what does having meat have to do with eating taquitos de frijol? Like, I love them. But because they created this love of just the life that we lived. And, we would do activities that were free and they were fun. We would go out hiking or we would go to the park and my dad would play with us and my mom would play, so, so I wanted to bring that image back and say, so don't think about, this is a prevention initiative. Think of the work we're doing as preparing the next assistant superintendent, the next state commissioner, the next, right? Like that, shifting that mindset. And so being an example in so many different ways. More recently, I think I've been more intentional about being an intentional mentor to to a variety of like youth and rising leaders. But I've been particularly focused on making sure that women who sometimes are more comfortable or are made to be comfortable in support roles, being the number two in an organization or being the person who is elevating someone else up, that they see themselves in the spotlight, that they're able to be the one who's interviewed, not just the one preparing someone for an interview, or that they're able to step into, why not run for office? Or why not be the executive director? Why not go up for that promotion? And it's been empowering to see them rise with less inhibitions, with more, I think, just willingness. And I see that a lot sometimes in working with moms in a lot of those spaces where, sometimes I've heard, moms tell me when I say, oh, there's this leadership position, or maybe you could run for the Bilingual Parent Advisory Council president or vice president. And you go, no, yo nomás soy una mamá. No, I'm just a mom. And I go, are you kidding me? Like that is one of the best, foundations for leadership. Let's go, let's take that and bring it into these other spaces. So,
Oh,
yeah, there's a
yes.
lot there. Thank you for
I
asking the
absolutely
question.
love your answer. I'm so glad I asked the question because you explained it very well. I think we are getting better at being like equal opportunities for women, but we're not there yet. And in our cultures, many times, it's we still grow, at least in my generation. I hope we're getting better with like my children, but we still grow with the concept of I'm gonna be a stay-at-home mom, right? Mostly. Um, and there's so much that we are able to do and to give back to the community, and we're so strong. And I love that you have the courage to say this was me. Your story was my story, and look where I'm at. So we still have a lot of work to do, and that's why we need to continue talking about this. We need to let our girls know that the opportunities are the same. The work is the same for both men
Mhm.
and women. So I love your
Yeah.
answer. Thank you.
Yeah, and honestly, I think sometimes over the years, I've come to realize how much I sometimes contribute to that, or how much I remember reading something and it really impacted me. Just something as simple as, when I see my nieces and nephews after not seeing them in a long time, you see a little boy and you go, oh my gosh, you got so big and you look so strong. It's such a normal response, and you see your niece and she comes up to you and you go, oh, que bonita, how pretty. And I'm like, why not say, you got so big and strong. Oh my gosh, show me your muscles. Who's ever told, that it's such a different way of interacting, but I thought it's little things and it's big things. And if in all those ways, sometimes my parents didn't want me to go on my first college trip when I was 15 to stay on campus at this youth leadership program because I was a girl and I was their daughter and we don't do sleepovers, and they weren't going to be there. And breaking through some of those barriers, I thought, well, had I been a boy, would they have let me? And what, how different was that? But they did. And over time, they then became mentors to other families to say, no, it's important. Our girls, if we want them to have the reach for the stars, we need to start preparing them for that. So, they both of them actually were really valuable mentors, I think, to other families and in thinking through those things. And even though my dad was very macho in a very Mexican sort of way culturally, I think he saw and understood since I was very small who I was as a person, the leadership potential that I had. I think he saw a lot of himself in me. And it was very empowering that he was not one of the people holding me back, but instead elevating me up, even when it was uncomfortable, because they were very different experiences from, I think, the way he was raised, his cousins, his siblings, his parents. So my parents really did innovate in a lot of ways. And I try to carry that forward in the work I do and in the communication I have with other families.
Definitely. It's very important. It takes willpower as parents to break those um like things that we have in our mind. But that's what we need to work with. Okay, so let's shift a little into PIQUE's mission. How can communities, educators, and partners support PIQUE's mission?
I think there are so many, PK's mission is bigger than its programs. It really is an organization that I think sees the potential for what would education look like if there were true partnership with families, not seeing families as something you have to deal with or as part of a problem that needs to be solved, but as part of the partnership that will help carry forward, not only our kids, but truly our next generation and society. I think education is that foundation for everything that comes after. That's how our future politicians, our future lawyers, our future teachers, our future doctors, our future cleaning staff, our future coaches, all of those folks today, right now, are kids making their way through our educational system. So we are shaping the future. And I think that PIQE is a resource to schools, to communities that are interested in helping to build and support more pathways for kids and families by supporting the family learning that happens in our programs. But I think it's also bigger than that. I think we are doing a little more work now with like the educator workshop and supporting, family engagement is not so easy to do. It's not something that you know how to do because you're a good person or because you care about kids and families, or even, given a background, we've all had limited experiences. Our experience is limited to what we've had an opportunity to live. And a lot of times through training and through learning, we can build our capacity to go beyond kind of our own experiences. So we have an educator workshop that's doing more of that, thinking, what would it look like if more teachers knew how to work with families in ways that are effective, connected, relational, if there was more trust in that process, if, families were communicating with teachers and teachers with families in more natural ways that just help to support kids. What would it look if teachers could better support families knowing how to help at home? And we do some of that at PIQE, right? We help families understand how to support literacy through our family literacy program. In the family math and STEM programs, we're really getting into, how to support math and science learning and all of those things. But that would be, I think the vision and mission is really about all schools having that available to families. And so we do some policy and advocacy as well to try to help move the system in that direction. I think that's another way that we kind of partner in the communities that we're in, trying to shift expectations and bring more resources into those communities. So I think there are a lot of different ways, but the simplest and most straightforward is bringing PIQE into a school or into a community program where we can work with families and help to start building that pipeline. Because I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to spend time with our parent ambassadors, and some of them started with PIQE 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they started going through a program, and then they went through another program. One of the moms said, "Oh, I went through the program several times because each time I did the program, I learned something new, even though the curriculum hadn't changed. I was reflecting, I'd grown as a parent, my kids were different, my first child wasn't the same as my second one." And so they're like, so I've done PIQE multiple times. Some of them have worked with PIQE in different capacities, and they're all advocating and they're making change in their communities. So, I think that just continuing to support our kind of our mission and our work in different ways is another way that I think communities and schools can really contribute to not only our mission, but us carrying it out together in their communities.
I love when I get a chance to speak to parent ambassadors, I just love listening to them and their stories because it shows how strong our communities really are once they have the tools. Again, it's coming to a new country where the school system is different than what you're used to, where there's a different language. But when you talk to them, it's like, oh my God, she had all these fears. And now that she has the tools, look at what she or him, because we have both women and men in parent ambassadors, look at what they're achieving and doing and how they're moving their community. I love speaking to our parent ambassadors.
Yeah, and that's where, I've had conversations in my career with folks who say, well, you can't empower families. Families already have power. And I believe that there's a lot of power and potential in every family. But a lot of times, if you don't know that you have that power, if you don't know how to use it, if you don't understand the different ways of participating in your child's education, from supporting at home to maybe collaborating with the school to being a voice on one of those leadership spaces or advocating, right? There's so many different ways. And it does require learning to sort of unlock that power and unlock that potential. And when you see it happen with families and you kind of see year after year that growth, it really is validating and energizing, to continue doing this kind of work.
That is correct, and that's why we're here. Reyna, it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you beyond your title. As we continue or we begin this new chapter in PIQE, we're glad that you're here with us. We're grateful for your leadership and we look forward to working alongside you. Thank you also to everyone listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the PIQE Podcast and share this episode with your colleagues, friends, and families. Until next time. Thank you, Reyna.
Thank you.